What I've been writing about and working with people and working with myself around is this idea that our identity is really sort of in this seed in the ground. We all have this potential to be a flower or be an apple tree, whatever it's going to be. And sometimes we're in this really acidic soil that's unhealthy and will explode underground, or a worm will eat us, or we'll get mowed down. And so, yeah, you explode and you realize, but you're not getting to that full potential. And that full potential probably isn't what's in your mind, right? Like we map out these full maps of what our lives are going to look like, and it's probably not that. But if we don't really know how to create these environments around us while we're exploding, and then now this grief for our partners of like, I thought you were someone else, now you're this, you were acting this way, now you respond this way. And so it really can impact that partnership of feeling like I know you so well, I'm in love with you even more because you're figuring out how to love yourself. And yet I don't even recognize you because when I say this, we have now had a completely different experience in our attachment.
Assuming you link up with someone who's growing and assuming you're paying attention, watching someone truly grow, nothing will make you love them more, right? Because there's a pride in it. You're loving their inner child who's doing this thing that hurts. An identity explosion is when a person undergoes an internal shift in how they perceive and allow themselves to express their place in the world. And it can include anything from coming out as transgender or gender fluid to redefining or finally owning your sexuality and much, much more. Moraya Seeger DeGeare is a neurodivergent Black biracial therapist and the granddaughter of the famed musician Pete Seeger. Growing up in Beacon, New York, in a home filled with extended family, music, art, activism, and achievement, she learned early on to be aware of the spaces that she occupied. Currently a couples therapist focused on emotionally focused therapy, Moraya also authors the monthly Refinery 29 column called Can We Talk? So she bears witness to a lot of what is changing about society from the inside. Today's podcast covers something that's been coming up a lot recently in her sessions with clients: how to navigate the grief a person can feel when their partner experiences an identity explosion while staying supportive. Some explosions involve more externally visible changes than others, but they all alter the romantic relationship. Are heteronormative relationships destined not to survive it? Are queer or gender fluid couples necessarily better equipped to work through the confusion in order to hold on to the love? What does working through something like a gender transition or a sexuality transition raise to the surface in terms of the assumptions we all make in every relationship of our lives? First question: what is an identity explosion for people who don't get it?
Identity explosion, all of us, especially those of us who are very curious about ourselves and are curious around understanding ourselves and are pushing ourselves, are going to go through that. And for some of us, it's a much more obvious experience of we're taking the inside work and putting on the outside. So if you were like transitioning, or if you were doing something that really changes in a very visual way who you are, so these like very like tangible identity changes. And we can talk about that. And there's a little bit more of a framework that some people experience, but there's all these other kinds of identity explosions, which would be maybe a major shift in career choices or potentially also in parenting. And so a lot of those unmet expectations around what I thought this parenting thing was going to look like, not so much that I didn't understand parenting. I've been nannying and with kids since I was little. I understand children. I like over research. I'm one of those like this like over research style parenting. But the amount of things that come up inside of you as you're actively experiencing this human come into the world, both through my body, but also I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so my 9-year-old is really had a hard time with a move we did from New York to North Carolina, still ambiguous, but sort of they have sort of a autism, ADHD, anxiety style diagnosis, but also was triggered by bullying and some racism that they hadn't experienced. And in their change, I now had to address a lot of these incredible things from when I was 8 or 9 that I had kind of just placed over here.
Placed over
Right.
here.
But then the real thing is was like, oh my goodness, like my sense of self and why I do things has completely changed. And so now I feel very naked.
And I do want to focus on romantic relationships for the purposes of this conversation, because identity explosion can extend to so many different things. What
Mhm.
is the biggest challenge for a therapist in helping couples navigate gender based identity explosion?
Yeah. So I think gender, we don't want to overclump like gender and sexuality, but I think there's potentially for couples a lot of overlap because they've maybe talked about sexuality and now that the gender expression is the newer part.
Hmm.
Or, they've, from a values perspective, are very affirming couple, but now one of them's coming out as bisexual, right? So it's moving from that like head place of I'm okay with this thing happening in the world. What does it mean for me that it's happening with this person?
In my relationship is
Yep,
very different.
exactly.
Hmm.
And so I think that the place that can get stuck is somebody is stuck in the past. And so for couples, when someone's changing or doing something different, we often don't really notice, right? We habituate so heavily to like, this is our routine, these are our patterns. And someone needs to do that. Research really shows us in behavior change, we're going to notice our partner do something different 30, 40 times later after they've been doing it. And so for couples that are just doing communication differences and shifts and they didn't step into that trigger the same way, it's still going to take that long for the partner to be like, oh, this feels different.
So you're saying we believe our habitual expectation of our partner more than we believe what they're actually doing right now.
Oh, yeah. Because
Wow.
not just that we're distracted, but we also are seeing this person that we're so familiar with, right? Like my partner is a very like rigid routine person.
Uh-huh.
So I could tell you, oh, they did this morning, then this morning, and then this morning. I didn't witness them doing those things. I
Mhm.
just know that's what they do in the morning. And then I had those points of interaction that were predictable. So my brain didn't really notice anything else.
And we're designed to take comfort in stability, right? But we're also going to uh, rely on it.
Yeah, we're relying on it, but we're making sense of them through those habits. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
in the couples room, what we're often doing is seeing you've made sense of your partner and why they do this thing. So why they maybe dress this way, express themselves this way, cut their hair this way, and their relationship to that thing is through your reality if you've never talked about it. So
Hmm.
now they change this thing. The grief spot for a partner is, well, I thought you were doing this thing because it was attached to this value. But that was my perception that we've never really talked about. It wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a good thing. It just simply wasn't something I've talked about with my partner. And it wasn't necessarily for them, their understanding of why they're doing it. And so now we sit in these brand new conversations for couples that are about transition and how they're expressing themselves and comfort. And for me, the couples coming into the room are very comfortable with that. There's not really having this adverse reaction of you're coming out and I don't want to be with you. That's not who's sitting in my room at
That's
all.
not who's coming to you, because they're not going to make it to your office if they're not interested in doing some work and loving each other through this thing,
Yeah.
whatever it looks like.
Right. And the confusion point and the grief point is so heavily in my reality now needs to change and I
Hmm.
don't even know where to go. And then we have to re-meet in this present place. And so then I physically have to put eyes on you, ask you more questions, but also there's such tenderness with these couples. I also don't want to ask you questions that are giving you the impression I don't like that you're doing this or it's not okay because this person is also sitting in incredible fear, self doubt, worry that they're about to be abandoned, rejected, not accepted because they've been holding, most people, depending what this big transition is, they've been holding knowledge of pieces of that if they hadn't put it all together since they were kids. And so they've been trying and masking, and doing all these things to try to sort of get along as is, and it can't happen anymore. And so that's sort of that unifying experience in a big explosion is that realization that no matter what I do at this point, this seed is going to bust open. Have I
Hmm.
created an environment that can hold me Do I have friends that are willing to see me as I radically change faster than I can even fully articulate?
More than once in my life, I have had someone express to me something that they think might be shameful.
Hmm.
And both times, I have been thanked for not being mean. And actually, in both cases, the thing they told me didn't work for me in long term for the relationship. It was like, okay, then you're right. We're probably not going to be a fit, but oh my God, are you okay? It was always very clear that anybody who's making a big life change, that's not about me. That's about you. And how long must you have been holding on to whatever you're holding on to?
Yeah.
But multiple times I've been thanked for just not being a jerk when someone reveals something that feels potentially shameful, scary, whatever it
Mm.
is. But in general, how likely is a relationship to survive a gender identity explosion?
I wouldn't even pretend to have a data point on that. But in reality, these are not data points that are remotely being studied enough. And you and I are so underrepresented in the research.
Yeah,
And so, a lot of times when we're looking at how can I relate this to clinical research, we're doing our own work to like put it through a culture lens and we're just piecemealing it together. And so, research is done on mostly like heteronormative white couples. And yes, it's getting better, but like we're not going to find 50 studies on this. Like some of my favorite studies quoting about relationship work are still heteronormative white couples. And then we have to extrapolate out from that.
is the elephant in the room in your sessions the fear of abandonment by the transitioning partner?
I don't think anyone's tiptoeing around it. I think
Okay.
people are going straight into it. I mean, if you're self-aware enough to be transitioning or to already be in a queer relationship, there's
Hmm.
also that level of conversation in your relationship that in my experience is so much higher than a lot of hetero normative relationships around conversation because you've had to define it for yourself from the very beginning. It's always sort of a one-off conversational experience versus those of us in hetero-presenting relationships have so many models in whatever society you're in of what this can look like. And so a lot of times for couples is we don't even talk about what our relationship is because we're sort of assuming we're on the same page. It looks
Right.
similar. I mean, I think that's a great reason why couples come into therapy when it's not even tension. They're like, oh my gosh, we were thought we were on the same page, but now our
Right.
childhoods were so
Yeah.
different. I do have couples that might be the avoidant couple that comes in and it's very quiet and they're like, we don't really fight. That work is really taking these very tender, gentle moments, sitting in their body, helping reintroduce to even being aware of a small irritation and making sense of that versus like the explosive couple who is so big and it's just me like holding it down in the room.
Stop throwing things. Stop throwing. What did we say about throwing things? Right. But then what it makes me wonder is how did two avoidants even end up in your office? Were they like looking for a Chipotle and then they're in your
Oops.
office and they're like, whoops, well, I guess we're here. I guess we can do therapy if you want. I don't know. Maybe if you, I don't know, whatever. Like how do two avoidants even end up in therapy?
Well, so I'm certified in emotionally focused therapy. So this is a style of therapy that's attachment based. It's the most research, empirically studied style of therapy. We really look at that pattern of connection, the dance between you and your partner, and then we identify the pattern. We get underneath that pattern, and we see where you're triggering each other, where you're passing over like a defensive wound until we can
Mhm.
see what that is. You might have an emotionally avoidant, talkative partner who seems really outgoing and they're an extrovert, but emotionally they're an avoidant. And that can be so confusing. And then they might have this like beautifully deep introverted spouse who, when people look at this relationship from the outside, they see this husband or, maybe more masculine presenting male partner as being the one carrying the emotions of the relationship. But really, they're talking around their emotions all day long.
Right.
So we talk about pursuers and withdrawers in emotionally focused therapy. So one person, often the more feminine partner, is the one reaching for connection, reaching. And
Mhm.
the other one is, I need my time to digest. give me a couple days and I'll come back.
The challenge is sometimes people are retreating so they can process, and sometimes people are retreating because they think all it takes is time,
Yeah, and it will just
which
blow over.
which obviously it doesn't. I used to say, I married my boyfriend. I came home from the honeymoon, closed the door, turned around, and Tex was sitting in the chair. And I was like, who dis? Because you end
Mm,
up married to the pattern of your partner's childhood, the
yeah.
acceptable, quiet patterns of your partner's childhood. Um, and
Mm,
the other thing that you were making me think of is the happiest hetero couple that I know is one who could not have grown up on more different planets. And the reason is because they had to negotiate everything from day one. There were no assumptions. And I can see why, based on that template, queer couples would actually do better in therapy, right? Because that facility with communication and that valuing of communication and what it can get you is already there. But you work with both types of couples. So I have questions about romantic couples navigating sexuality and gender-based identity explosion. How much of the time are people questioning why they didn't know this about their
mm.
partner? Like questioning, why didn't I see this?
I mean, I can't say that's like a high present thing that is the need for couples therapy of like,
Okay.
why didn't I know? um I think that worry of not knowing someone and potentially a partner, especially like, yeah, if they're sitting in the office, there's profound love here in this relationship.
Mhm.
And so potentially feeling guilty around, I wasn't doing something to make you feel safe enough with me. And so that, yeah, why didn't I know is much more around like the beating up of, could I have done something 5, 10 years ago that would have let you know you can talk to me about anything. And so that can be a very shameful place, especially when it's such a massive thing someone is going to. And then we can do really nice repair around that, that a partner is able to say, um, I've always wondered this, but I couldn't really make sense of it, or I needed that 5 years of stability because my family system never made me even think that this was possible. I just
Mhm.
needed to know someone would stay with me, period, before I ever was going to say these words out loud. And you were the first one, or maybe I've been talking about it with my therapist, but really, a lot of the couples, their partner is the first one. And it's a little bit of that repair saying, I didn't know how to let the words into the world. And
Mm.
now that I'm doing it, here you are with me and you haven't left. And that's beautiful.
So there's guilt around, did I perhaps not create enough safety for you to be able to admit this about yourself sooner, until the person understands that in fact maybe they are the first person that ever created any kind of safety. But what about guilt that people feel for potentially no longer being attracted to their partner and their new self?
Yeah, I mean, I think the feeling of I love this person, but I'm not attracted to them happens without someone transitioning and things like that, like all the time. And it's a really complex place to be because attraction, yeah, sometimes it's just physical sexual attraction, hot and heavy, but like attraction to another person has so much to do with your own feeling of attractiveness. When we sit in that, a lot of times this person is feeling like, yeah, like attraction is, I'm this level of turned on, or I'm this level of this. And sometimes that person's body has changed, or maybe they're transitioning. I mean, literally have never had a couple where someone is changing their presentation based on gender expression and the partner's been like, I'm not attracted to this. I kid you not. Everyone, because
Wow.
they're so deeply attractive. Do you know how hot it is to have your partner feel more comfortable in their skin? Like that
No, I
is,
don't.
oh my gosh,
No, I
it's so
don't.
fucking sexy. So it doesn't have to be, we're all doing gender affirming care in different ways and getting the thing right. So like that's the thing of like these complex conversations get distilled down to like only these people over here are doing this. But like
Mhm.
our bodies are changing. We're,
Mhm.
fluffing it here, changing it there, dressing differently. And so sometimes people don't feel as attracted to their partners. That's super real. But it could also be that your partner is feeling just very like self-loathing about themselves and sort of hating their body, and they're in the place of maybe they're coming out, but they're binding and they're, thinking about getting surgery and things like that. So it's not so much I'm not attracted to you, but you're so uncomfortable in your body. I don't even know how to approach or
You.
feel like a sexual energy with you when you're disassociating and doing all these, like, there's a lot of conversations we're having around sex that are very different than, like, are they hot to me?
They're really about safety.
Oh yeah.
Right. Do you think people feel compelled to stay with their partner after an identity explosion?
More than like other moments.
Mhm.
Mm,
I'm trying to focus on the experience of the partner who's not having the explosion
yeah.
and how they navigate it. Our basest, worst responses, right? The worst response you heard, the situation where someone's coming to you and saying, "I no longer want to be with this person, but I'm not sure they're stable enough for me to go. What do I do?" So, in that context, do you think people feel compelled out of guilt or the fear of hurting someone to stay?
I can't speak for that experience directly. It's also not exactly what sits in my office, but I think there's a level of, yeah, there's guilt that it's going to be interpreted as a rejection of what they're going through versus this is not the partnership that we once had. I think there's a knowing, though, for a lot of couples, and especially so if they've already had kids together,
Mm.
honoring we're going to be able to co-parent. And for many couples, like, there's a really nice friendship that is very different. And it's also, yeah, so if you're speaking sort of like, and their attraction changes, so one person maybe never saw themselves, they were a lesbian couple and now
Mhm.
someone's transitioning, and yeah, I'm attracted to women and I don't actually see you as a woman anymore. And so it's honoring, I love you, I care about you, I'm going to continue co-parenting with you, and them as a couple talking about that as a whole, and it makes a lot of sense. um I think it's just probably far less shocking in that moment in those conversations. Like, it's a really tender, loving conversation versus maybe the way media might project that out as like someone's going to be shocked. It's like this really deep, much more intuitive experience of like two souls, and perhaps honoring it's a little bit more around, I want you to feel very comfortable exploring all of these things because you're sort of a new teenager, right? You're this
Mhm.
new person in this new body. um and I love you enough to, like, not allow you, but to
But to
sort of,
want you to be happy.
oh
Yeah,
yeah.
to just want you to be a happy person. And in a heteronormative relationship, you're going to hear a lot more shame, a lot more hiding, a lot more surprise, a lot more of those Hollywood moments. You're expecting, there was a term I read when I was researching this, and there was a lot of uh, uh, vitriol around it. The term was trans widow.
Mm, yeah.
And I wanted you to explain, why is the term trans widow so offensive?
Ugh. I mean, because it centers the experience of the person who's not going through the experience. Like, I am happy to work through the grief with that other partner, and they need that individual support. But
Mhm.
anytime, even so, I really specialize in mixed relationships. And so that partner that is maybe dominant culture, right, which would be the person not transitioning, when they're centering their experience and making sense of it through this very dominant culture term, right? That is doing more damage because
Mhm.
what we're doing is we're minimizing the racism, or we're minimizing the fact that this person is in part of this incredibly marginalized group that is super scary. And we're centering this dominant culture experience. And anytime we're doing that is a scary place to be. It also can very much dehumanize the complexities of what's going on. And so, anytime that we are actively dehumanizing and othering and reducing down in that way, we need to interrupt it. We need to stop it and be like, what is going on with me? That it feels safer to dehumanize this whole system, right? And mostly I'm scared, right? I'm really scared. And so I think what might be a maybe a slightly more familiar conversation for some people is a partner understanding their sexuality and how fluid it is. And so we're still in this hetero normal presenting relationship. One person's coming out as bisexual in the relationship. It could mean they're opening the relationship to explore that, but it's a really important conversation for couples to understand that you can have deep conversations about your sexuality with absolutely no sort of overwhelming desire to now be in an open relationship. Open relationships are amazing for some couples. And for some couples, it really isn't their attachment style, but they need to be able to play in fantasy with their partner in a way that doesn't feel shameful. And so opening up and letting your partner into this inner world is really releasing that shame. And so as you're expressing, you've had partners in the past
Right.
open up to you, they expect a negative experience from you. Ultimately, what they're opening up doesn't continue the relationship. But for couples where one person is opening up about who they are in their sexuality and they want to continue the relationship and nothing about what they're saying means it needs to end, you are now, and this is the beautiful work of therapy, you're able to now work with their shame. And shame is a block to connection. And connection can help us get rid of addiction patterns, can help us get rid of burnout, right? So we can really push through. And so many couples are unaware of how that shame bubble has been sitting between them, like this third beast in the room. You pop that, and it's like, yeah, up here, I'm worried about like, oh, okay, so you're coming out. Do you really want to be with a woman? Am I enough? I don't have the right parts. Is that what this is about? Centering me, not that,
Centering
right?
yourself.
And really, it's about just popping the shame bubble because the shame had been distracting them and making it so that they're not in their body and they're up here worrying of being found out or something like that.
And I love your explanation, because I knew on an instinctive level why the term trans widow was offensive. I could never have articulated it, obviously, the way that you do, but part of what really got to me about that term was widow,
Yeah.
to imply that the person is dead. Now, to say you have the ambiguous loss makes sense to me because you have lost something.
Yeah.
But to say the word widow, when I went down the rabbit hole and I started reading that, I thought, my God, it's so hurtful to widows. It's so hurtful to trans people. Why do you think it is that people in hetero relationships, when there is a gender identity explosion, have so much trouble celebrating their partner's bravery while also grieving the life that they've lost? Why can't they hold both?
A lot of us struggle with just the very simple concept of two things can be true,
Mm.
right? And we all sit in black and white thinking in different ways. And when fear shows up, we get more rigid. We want to organize it, we want to create safety. I just want my partner to know that whatever they're going through, I'm here for them. And so then I can't have this other stuff. But then the partner really needs to know that this person that they love, you know, is still a complex human with all this other stuff. So we need to be able to talk about it. And what I've really seen with couples is it's just one person exploding at this time. And then that's going to trigger this other thing because what does halt relationships and friendships and and systems is when one person is advancing so much and now the environment isn't advancing with them. And we see this in friendships.
For
I
sure.
loved your episode talking about friendships. I listened to that one.
Thank you.
And so you were talking about sort of like every 7 years friendships, we lose
You lose
50%
half
of
your
our friendships.
friendships
And I
because you
love
don't renegotiate the terms the way that you should.
it's a scary thing. And for
Mhm.
friendships, we have it modeled so much less than partnerships.
Mhm.
And knowing that it's okay to really ask for more from some people.
Well, and I think as we're all getting older as well, people are trying to more actively hold on to their relationships and deepen the ones that are worth betting on in the long term in a way that our parents' generation didn't. And frankly, prior generations didn't because they'd all be dead by now or they'd be, you know what I mean, half dead by now. And we're at an age where it's like so many of us have already had our children. Maybe we've had our divorces. Maybe we're on our 800th relationship. Maybe we've now had our identity explosions in whatever sphere of life. And so after all of that, and by the way, a global pandemic happened. And so with all of that, we're trying harder to hold on to the people that we love in whatever way, shape, and form we can do that.